On a quiet March afternoon in 1969, a small town in the American Midwest lost something it would spend the next half-century trying to recover: the truth. The town was Wahoo, a peaceful community where everyone knew one another and violent crime was almost unheard of. And the victim was a 17-year-old high school junior named Mary Kay Heese. Mary Kay was known as shy, kind, and dependable. Teachers described her as a thoughtful student. Friends remembered her as someone who rarely caused trouble and usually followed the rules. She had dreams like most teenagers: college, friendships, a life that stretched far beyond the quiet streets of Wahoo. But on March 25, 1969, that future vanished. Earlier that afternoon, Mary Kay finished track practice at Wahoo High School. Afterward, she stopped with friends at a small café where students often gathered. They talked, laughed, and drank hot chocolate. Nothing about the moment seemed unusual. When Mary Kay left the café, she began walking home alone along a tree-lined street just a few blocks from her house. It should have been a short walk. 6 blocks, 10 minutes, but Mary Kay never made it home. When she failed to arrive for dinner, her parents grew concerned. At first, they believed she might have stopped to visit a friend or stayed late somewhere in town. But as the evening hours passed, worry turned into fear. Mary Kay wasn't the type to disappear without telling someone. Eventually, her parents called the police. Search efforts began quickly, but the darkness of night made it difficult to see much of anything. Then, just after midnight, the worst possible discovery was made. Mary Kay's body was found in a roadside ditch a few miles outside of town. The scene was brutal. She had been stabbed multiple times. Investigators believed she had fought fiercely for her life. Evidence suggested that she may have been inside a vehicle before escaping and trying to run. Footprints and signs of a struggle told a desperate story. She had almost gotten away. But someone caught her and killed her. For the small town of Wahoo, the crime was unthinkable. Parents who once allowed their children to roam freely suddenly watched them more closely. Neighbors locked doors that had rarely been locked before. Everyone wanted answers. Investigators began interviewing anyone who might have seen Mary Kay that day. They spoke to friends from school, teachers, people who had been at the cafe. Leads came in quickly, but the truth proved far more elusive. One detail quickly became clear: Mary Kay likely knew her killer. Authorities believed she had entered a car voluntarily. In a small town like Wahoo, strangers were rare, which meant the person responsible could have been someone familiar. Over the next several years, investigators questioned hundreds of individuals connected to the case. More than 700 people were eventually investigated. Yet the trail never led to a conviction. Time passed. Years turned into decades. Witness memories faded. Evidence aged. And the case slowly slipped into the category every family fears most: a cold case. Then, more than 50 years later, something unexpected happened. New investigators began re-examining the case. Old files were reopened. Witness statements were reviewed again. And a name kept appearing in those files: Joseph Ambroz. Back in 1969, Ambroz had been a 22-year-old man living in Wahoo. He worked at a slaughterhouse and had previously served time for forgery in escaping custody. Investigators believed he knew Mary Kay through mutual friends. And over time, detectives began to suspect he had been involved in the murder. But proving it would take decades. In 2024, more than 55 years after the crime, a grand jury finally indicted Ambroz for the murder. He was arrested in Ponca City, Oklahoma, where he had quietly been living. For Mary Kay's surviving family members, the arrest felt surreal. They had waited more than half a century to hear those words. We found the suspect. But the road to justice was not as simple as they hoped. Because the crime happened in 1969, the legal system had to follow the laws that existed at that time. And those laws limited what prosecutors could ultimately charge. In 2025, Ambroz pleaded no contest to conspiracy to commit murder, a lesser charge tied to Mary Kay's death. The maximum sentence allowed under the law in 1969 was only 2 years in prison. For many members of Mary Kay's family, the outcome felt deeply unfair. Some believed he should have faced a full murder trial. Others felt the plea deal meant justice had been compromised. Even investigators who spent years working the case admitted the resolution was painful. One detective famously said it felt like the suspect had gotten away with murder. Yet the conviction still represented something important. For the first time in more than 5 decades, someone had been held accountable in connection with Mary Kay Heese's death. But the story still leaves haunting questions. Was Joseph Ambroz acting alone?